And also, I will point this out that he is the leader in Pro Bowl votes right now. The 2 and on, they are real, and expect us, John. What do we see out of Tua?
Yeah, the third eye of two and on, just that's a powerful group that you simply do not mess with.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome into Monkey Knife Fights NFL Week 14 preview show. We got a super show for you this week as John McKechnie is along for the ride with Nick, Whalen, and I. But guys, since we have John here, I thought we would start off talking a little college football. We're on the cusp of bowl season. We got the Army-Navy game coming up this week, which we will talk about later. The Heisman ceremony is Saturday night. We have the playoff matchups are set. We're all looking forward to those. Coaching carousel, that's pretty much done. Nick looks pretty happy with the Luke Fickell hiring, I'm guessing. Yeah, there's that smile. He's looking pretty happy with that one.
Oh, yeah.
And then we're also in the middle of transfer season. You know, you got guys like DJU, Phil Jurkovec, JT Daniels, who's going to be playing until he's like 35 with all the extra eligibility he's getting. But I'm wondering if you guys saw the one that came out on Wednesday night this week, and it's former Mississippi State running back Dylan Johnson, who puts up this big post. You know, like most of these guys do, it's usually kind of sappy, like, you know, I want to thank everybody, you know, thank my family, my teammates, the coaching staff, but, you know, better opportunities await elsewhere. This one, though, was a little different. So he starts off with the usual thing, and he thanks God, thanks his family, thanks his teammates. And then he gets into the end of his post here, and hang on, let me just pull it up so I can read it to you. So with all that being said, since I'm not very tough and Leach is glad I'm leaving, I will be entering my name into the transfer portal with the hopes of finding a more fit playing environment for me. John, I'll start with you here. How do you feel about this? Do you like the sappy post, or you like the taking a shot on the door, on the way out the door?
I appreciate taking the shot. It surprises me very little that Mike Leach is real bristly about this type of stuff. Dylan Johnson, good player for Miss State, got a lot of playing time, but, it doesn't surprise me that behind closed doors that Leach, probably not the most pleasant guy to play for, not the most supportive and all this and that. And in today's day and age, that doesn't work. And you know what? Your reward is getting flamed for it by a guy on his way out the door. I did think that, it wasn't just, your classic Miss State commenters that were in the mentions, but, like Dan Mullen and people were like, this is not a good look. And it's like, shut up. Like, who cares? I think Leach has that coming to him pretty much all the time. He's just a bristly guy, and it breaks up the doldrums and like the mundane nature of these transfer announcements. So I'm all for it. I hope Dylan Johnson goes somewhere and thrives.
Yeah, maybe he was one of the guys that wanted to have a fish sandwich with his fat little girlfriend underneath.
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, maybe he was the guy that Leach was talking about. Nick, what do you think?
I love this. I mean, we see so many of these posts around this time of year, and they're all basically the same. I think every kid thinks that, like, when they're making their announcement that they're entering the portal, that like the nation's eyes are like reading every word of that tweet. And like you said, 99% of the time, it's exactly the same. There's a lot of the prayer hands emojis, like the emoji where the hands are going like this. I don't really know what that means. Most of them do thank God. It's God's decision to enter the transfer portal. A lot of people forget that. So I am glad at least that, this Mississippi State player was able to hit on that hallmark. But I'm all for differentiation. We like I said, we see the same graphic, the same posts over and over. I have no problem, taking what's ultimately a pretty innocent shot and kind of funny in a lot of ways, at your head coach on the way out. And it doesn't really matter, right? You're not playing for that guy anymore. And look, it's not like he, used the F word or something like that. Like, if other coaches want to come out and defend Mike Leach, I guess I understand it. But I thought, at the end of the day, it's, pretty harmless to take a very minor shot like that. I don't think any other school is going to see that and say, we're not taking this kid.
And of course, the cherry on top of this whole thing, Lane Kiffin retweeted it. Because Lane Kiffin cannot stay off Twitter. The man loves it. John, your thoughts on the playoff now that we've had a few days to kind of digest? I'm looking at this, and I'm really starting to like the over in that Georgia-Ohio State game.
Yeah, the way that Georgia's defense played, especially in the second half against LSU, would lead you to believe that, this matchup against Ohio State, they get a month to get healthier. That was kind of a big issue for them throughout the course of the season. Obviously, JSN isn't going to be playing, but their backfield is going to be a little bit healthier this time around. Mayan Williams or Trevion Henderson should be closer to full go. So that's a big help as far as Ohio State's offense goes. And they basically need to win in a shootout. I think that's the only way. I think if it's like a real grinded out game, I don't think that really favors them. But I think that overall, this was a relatively sweat-free decision by the committee. Once USC kind of played its way out of it on Friday night, then we did see, which I thoroughly loved. I think my favorite part of the weekend was Nick Saban getting on during the ACC championship game and like citing spreads of like, oh, who's going to be favored if we were to play these guys, and like all this stuff, like stuff that he never talks about. He's getting into, I mean, just shameless. He's like, well, we lost 2 games, but it was by less points than what Ohio State lost to Michigan by. Like, I mean, you could almost feel the lack of sincerity in everything that he was saying. He just kind of got propped up there to say the Alabama message and get off the screen. But it was funny nonetheless that he got put up to that and had to actually say it. So we have those clips that will live forever. It was very funny to see him kind of go used car salesman mode to sell his team getting into the playoff, which they absolutely did not deserve. Haha.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to mention the used car salesman thing. I also love the JSN news because like I've seen multiple people like freaking out like, oh my God, Ohio State's missing their best wide receiver. They've been missing him just about the entire season.
Yeah.
He's what, 5 games?
And he hasn't been full go for any of them. Like even when he played, even after he came back after the layoff, after the Notre Dame game, like he clearly just was never himself. So like really, he's going to get drafted off the Rose Bowl, which is pretty incredible.
It is. Nick, any playoff thoughts?
You guys covered it pretty well. I mean, I really wanted USC to get in, but like John said, once they lost to Utah, I think that became pretty difficult to justify. I know John and I had talked on the Rotowire XM show the previous week about, there's this notion that with the way that the rankings shaped up, that I know some writers were putting it out there on Twitter that, you basically can't be penalized for losing your conference title game. And as soon as USC lost on Friday night, it felt like that argument completely flipped. There was no expectation that they were going to make the playoffs. So I was a little disappointed just because I love watching Caleb Williams, who I believe went to the same high school as John McKechnie. A lot of people don't realize that. John's old pal back in Maryland. But in general, I think we got a fun field, right? Like, it's like, I hate Ohio State as a Wisconsin fan. I don't love seeing them get in, but they're deserving. They're the next team up. Ultimately, I would have been okay with Alabama getting in, but it's one of those things that the more you dig into it, the more difficult it becomes to make an argument other than Alabama is the most talented team. That may be true other than Georgia, but at that point, how many games does Alabama lose when you to the point that you cross them off? Like, if we're just doing, we want to see the 4 most talented teams play at the end of the season, then the regular season doesn't really matter at all. So I think the committee got it right. I think we have some really fun matchups, and Ohio State, Georgia, especially, that's going to be a war.
It absolutely is. And Alabama maybe cover Jalen Hyatt one time during that.
Just once.
Yeah, and you could be in the playoff. Anyways, moving on. NFL. We've reached that point in the season where, we start seeing the playoff scenarios, the clinching scenarios all over Twitter, and that's flooding our timelines. And a couple of big quarterback injuries are going to play into that. Now, last week, we saw Jimmy G go down, broken foot. Maybe we'll see him in the divisional round if the 49ers get that far. I think they could be potentially looking at a first-round matchup with the Giants, which maybe Brock Purdy could get them through that. But, Nick, you weren't very high on the 49ers, even with Jimmy G last week, as like a real threat in the NFC. Mm-hmm. Are you still all in on the Eagles, or is there anyone that you like to kind of challenge Philly here?
I wouldn't say I'm like all in on the Eagles, I guess, but I think they are the best team in the NFC. And it feels like collectively there's been this kind of belief that like the Eagles, for whatever reason, just keep needing to prove that they're a good team. And that's all they do week after week is prove that they're a good team. I mean, I thought Tennessee would be able to keep it close last week. They are kind of that type of team that's always able to keep it close regardless of the situation. They went to overtime with the Chiefs with Malik Willis at quarterback. And I don't even know if this is, like all of a sudden a thing where you jump off the Titans. It's just the Eagles are that good. So roundabout way of answering your question. Yes, to me, the Eagles are by far the favorites in the NFC. And I think it's interesting, like over at FanDuel, for example, the Niners Super Bowl odds really didn't change all that much in light of the Garoppolo injury. I mean, they moved from like 7-1 to 10-1, which I don't know if I agree with that. Like, I still think they could be a good team. Could they win a wild card game? Could they win a divisional game? Yeah, sure they could. But I think with Brock Purdy at quarterback, a guy who we have now seen for like a total of, I don't know, 60 snaps this season, I think you have to remove the Super Bowl upside from the equation for San Francisco.
Yeah, Mr. Irrelevant, not that much of a drop off from Jimmy G. I don't know if I buy that either. John, let's get a temperature check here in the AFC North. Lamar Jackson, that knee injury, he could be out from anywhere from like 1 to 3, 4 weeks. We don't really know right now. But can Tyler Huntley keep the Ravens afloat while Lamar is out?
So my colleague Mario Puig and I were talking about this on the Rotowire NFL show earlier today, and basically the Ravens were getting so little out of like maximizing Lamar Jackson that the floor of this offense doesn't really change that much with Tyler Huntley back there. Like he can do 75% of the kind of stuff that Lamar Jackson was doing, and the rest of the offense just in and of itself is so clunky that Lamar Jackson was, yes, unable to get the most out of it because of Greg Roman, but at the same time, like Tyler Huntley can certainly basically do a decent impression of what Lamar Jackson had been doing over the last month of the season or so. I think that what comes back to bite them is the sheer lack of weapons outside of Mark Andrews. The backfield still really up in the air. We don't know what's up with J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, 6 carries for like 12 yards this past week. Kenyon Drake is basically the best guy that they have going right now. So that's a huge issue. I think that the schedule is really favorable to the Ravens the rest of the way. And we have the sample of Huntley taking over down the stretch last year, and the Ravens played well. They played competitive. They were within pretty much every single game other than the Bengals game, but they lost like all of those games. So it's important to remember that. They barely beat the Broncos this past week. I feel like the stock is way down for this Baltimore team, and it's not only Lamar Jackson. I think that this team is kind of proving to be pretty fraudulent. Meanwhile, the Bengals are looking pretty amazing at this stage, and I'll be shocked if the Bengals don't run away with this division here, even though they still need to get ahead of the Ravens record wise with that tiebreaker.
The Bengals certainly are heating up. I mean, that game last week, Joe Burrow, he is the guy. He is that dude. Nick, how do you feel about Tyler Huntley from a fantasy perspective? Like, if you're in a 2-quarterback league, are you picking him up immediately if he's there?
I am, yeah. And the thing with Huntley is you have to keep in mind that this could just be a 1-week thing. The Ravens have been really vague. So I wouldn't be like, if you have a comparable option, I wouldn't necessarily drop somebody who's essentially guaranteed to start the rest of the way in favor of Huntley, because I do like Huntley more than like your typical bargain bin guys. But again, it could just be a 1 or 2 week stint. And I know in some leagues, like if you're playing in the NFFC, like this is the last week for waivers. So, you're kind of stuck with your roster the rest of the way. But no, I'm intrigued. I think for fantasy, there's a lot to like. I think he has a higher floor in fantasy than he does in real life, just because of the running. Obviously it was ugly last week, but I think a lot of that goes to crediting the Denver defense, which is the #1 fantasy defense against quarterbacks this season. One of the turnovers came on what I can only describe as one of the worst trick plays I've ever seen. John, I'm sure you watched that one. Yeah. I don't know. We get a couple of those per year. Like, in practice, they're like, hey, if it's not there, throw it away. It's all good. We'll set it up. 2nd down and 10, no big deal. That was such an obvious, like, don't throw it. And of course it was picked off. So, I think that the Broncos have been able to kind of slow down everybody this season. I think the bigger concern, if you're Baltimore, is, okay, we didn't play well against Jacksonville. We didn't play well at all against Carolina. And, I remember talking to you, John, like a month ago, and it was all optimism. Like, Ravens are running away with this division. Everything's great. And this offense has just been stuck in the mud for 4 games in a row. So I don't know that Tyler Huntley necessarily pulls them out of that. I'm with you that I now like Cincinnati quite a bit more in that division. And Baltimore, to me, they're kind of in the same boat as like Tennessee, where it's like, yes, we acknowledge that they are a good team. Yes, they're going to make the playoffs, but is this really a team that anybody's taking seriously as a team with Super Bowl upside? I don't really feel that way anymore. It feels like they're a piece short on offense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. John, Brock Purdy, we talked about him quite a bit last year on the college football show at Iowa State. How do you see him as a fantasy option? Are you adding him anywhere?
So I tried to get him in a 2 QB league. I got outbid. I had all of $7 left, and I put more money on Tyler Huntley. Did not get him, and also did not get Purdy. So now I'm the proud haver of one lightly used Desmond Ritter for when he comes off the bye. So we're running Darnold and Mike White. So that this week. So we're living on the edge as far as that one goes. But I think Purdy. I think it said a lot to me that the Niners were comfortable with letting him throw the ball 37 times last week. That says to me that Shanahan's comfortable keeping the offense status quo with him not having to dumb it down, simplify it, change it up all that much, just kind of plug and play. I think that Shanahan also is a little bit like narcissistic almost with like, look what I can get out of Nick Mullins. Look what I can get out of CJ Beathard. So that there's like a little bit of that, but I think Purdy is probably better than both of those guys. So there's something there with this guy. And I think that there's just enough talent around him to where he can be like a decent, again, 2-quarterback league only type of guy or DFS only type of guy. But even still, like I'm lightly believing in Brock Purdy, even though, like you said, we talked about him a lot last year on the college show, someone that we live in a world where there was a time where Purdy was considered like a potential day 2 quarterback. He got worse over his time at Iowa State, oddly enough, like Benjamin Button style. But I think overall Purdy, fine. I think Nick tied it up well, where it's like I think the Super Bowl upside's out the window if he's starting, but the Niners aren't like going away just because he's starting.
All right, let's pause the Purdy talk here for a few minutes. We'll talk more about him and the Niners when we preview that Bucs San Francisco matchup in the 425 window on Sunday. But we got a great 1 o'clock window as well. Let's pull up our 10 by 10 here on MKF. And we'll do a little speed round here to start. Let's start off with Joe Burrow. He's 0-4 against the Cleveland Browns in his career. Still looking for that first win against Cleveland. They're at home this weekend. 279.5 yards, Nick, more or less for Burrow.
I'm going more. Burrow is one of those guys that like the numbers aren't always crazy eye popping. Last week, 286 on 25 completions against the Chiefs. That's really good. 2 touchdowns. But that was also a game where there just weren't that many possessions. I think it was like 8 possessions each. Long drives on both sides. Both defenses, didn't really hold up all that well. I think this is somewhat of a mini revenge game for the Bengals. I don't think I don't think that locker room is like crazy fired up about the Week 8 loss to the Cleveland Browns. But that's the last team that beat the Bengals, and really the last team that pushed Cincinnati. I mean, they've really taken off offensively since that game. I'm shocked that this line has actually moved in favor of Cleveland this week. I saw it down to 5.5 from 6. I think this is a really good spot for Cincinnati. And part of it is I don't think Cleveland's very good. I really don't. I think they played a D- offensive game last week against the Houston Texans and were extremely lucky that they were playing the Houston Texans. I don't think Deshaun Watson looks confident. I don't think he looks ready to me. So I think this is a really good spot for Cincinnati.
All right, John, Kirk Cousins, the 10-2 Vikings are 2-point underdogs at the 5-7 Detroit Lions, but Kirk Cousins' line is 275.5, more or less.
I'm going less. I'm picking up what Vegas is putting down. Like I certainly coming into this week, I would have said that the Vikings were like a field goal favorite on the road here. I mean, they're 10-2 versus a 5-7 team. They beat the Lions earlier this year. It was a relatively close game, but I certainly wouldn't have thought that the Vikings would be dogs in this spot, but I'm going to go with it. And I think that part of going for it means that I think Cousins struggles in this spot. So I'm going to go with less than 275.5 for him.
Are the Vikings the most disrespected team in the NFL, or do you think people are right with kind of disrespecting and thinking that they're a fraudulent 10-2 team?
It's tricky because I think that people are like really hard line on the fraudulent element. They always point to the point differential, that they are winning all these close games, but they're winning them. I mean, there is something to be said for that. And you can't tell me that any fan base that is playing against Minnesota in January feels particularly great about having to go up against Justin Jefferson, the pass rush that they have, the linebackers, Dalvin Cook. Like there are pieces on this team. Maybe they aren't as good as a 10-2 team or 10-2 record would suggest. But yeah, they do really seem to get a lot of disrespect from almost everybody. I think part of it is people projecting their own hatred on Kirk Cousins onto the Vikings as a whole, but that's a whole other discussion.
Nick, any thoughts on the Vikings?
Yeah, I don't know if it's hatred. I think it's just like disbelief. It's like a Kirk Cousins team can't be this good. The numbers do indicate that this is quite literally the worst team ever with this high of a win percentage. I actually looked this up earlier this week for one of my articles on Rotowire. I think it's going back to like 1978. There are 34 teams that finished the season with at least a win percentage of 83%, which is where the Vikings are right now at 10-2. So obviously, we're looking at 5 more games to be added to the sample. They're currently plus 10, despite being 10-2. That is far and away the worst point differential of any team with that win percentage. And again, they could add to that. Maybe they get a couple blowouts down the stretch and it starts to look better. But they could also be blown out again, much like they were by the Dallas Cowboys, losing that game 40-3. So I kind of see both sides, that there's good people on both sides, if you will. I think they're like, the numbers do indicate that this is one of the worst teams ever with this record. But at the same time, like John said, it's not like this is different to me than the Giants getting off to a hot start, because you look at the personnel and you're like, this just does not add up. Other than Kirk Cousins, you have a really good running back. You have probably the best receiver in the league in Jefferson. You made a trade for a borderline elite tight end in Hawkinson. There's still a decent amount of talent on the defensive side of the ball. You have a great left tackle in Darisaw. So I don't look at the Vikings and say this is a bad team that's 10-2. I think they're a good team with a great record is how I would put it.
Yeah, shock and disbelief, I think, is the right way to put it. Back in May, I made a bar napkin bet that the Vikings would not win the NFC North with one of my buddies. He's been texting me just about every single day. He still has.
They haven't clinched it yet.
Yeah, he still has the napkin. I'm just not even responding at this point. I just keep getting the photo of the napkin with my signature, which is just terrible. It's awful. Anyways, moving on. Nick, Derrick Henry, 89.5 rushing yards against your Jacksonville Jaguars, more or less.
Henry struggled the last few weeks, man. So props to the people at MKF making this line. This is difficult. I'm tempted to go with the less, but counterpoint, it is the Jaguars defense. And over the last month, they are 31st in defensive EPA. This has been a defense that has gotten worse and worse as the season has gone along. If there was ever a time for Derrick Henry to get back on track, this would be the week. So reluctantly, I'm going to go more. I don't trust the Jags defense. We don't really know what's up with Treylon Burks. Ryan Tannehill, now both ankles are banged up. I think this is a spot where, if possible, they want to lean on Derrick Henry as much as they can.
All right, John, moving on. Let's go back to Minnesota. Justin Jefferson, 100.5 receiving yards, more or less, against the Lions.
I will take the more on this one. The beauty of going less on Cousins and still going more on Jefferson is that his target share is such that, yeah, he can basically be the entire passing game and, basically still not be able to carry Cousins over that number because the lack of production that they're getting elsewhere. Hawkinson's been okay, but your KJ Osbornes of the world just haven't been getting it done. So Jefferson, he can eat and still have a bad Kirk Cousins game overall is kind of the result that I'm expecting. So I just, in general, have a hard time going against Justin Jefferson. Give me the more.
I like it. Nick, Josh Allen against the Jets. They're in Buffalo this week, 270.5, more or less.
270.5 against that Jets defense. Ugh. I do like the Bills to win this game. I don't think they lose twice to the Jets. As much as I respect Mike White, and his family, I still don't really fully buy in on that whole thing. I think he benefited greatly from facing the Bears in his first start. And I think, there's some kind of quick to anoint him as anything more than just an average backup. But I also think this is a game where, that Jets defense, much like it did a month ago, is going to frustrate the Buffalo Bills. So I'm going to go less here. I think the Bills get it done. I don't think it's necessarily pretty, but I'll go less. Despite Josh Allen, by the way, looking like peak Josh Allen again last week for the first time in a while.
Absolutely. Yep. I don't need to relive that at all.
Nope, we can move on.
All right. Moving on to his stud receiver, John. Stephon Diggs, same going against the Jets, 99.5 receiving yards, more or less.
I'm going less. I'm with Nick in the sense that I think that Allen goes a little bit less here. I think that, this Jets defense really flustered him last time around. And, Josh Allen, for his own part, has only cleared this number once in his last 6 games. And so I just think that Diggs, very much tethered to Allen's production. I think that we're going to see a good game from him. But, with sauce, you got to factor in the sauce. I'm going less for Diggs.
All right, Nick Chubb at the Bengals, 85.5 rushing yards.
Yes, but from one Nick to another, I feel very qualified to be discussing this. Man, I'm going to go less. Cincinnati's defense has really impressed me these last few weeks. I thought it held up about as well as it possibly could have against Kansas City. Had it not been for a couple of deep balls on third downs, I think we might be feeling even better about that Cincinnati defense. And look, Nick Chubb, I don't even think he got to this number last week against Houston. And that is the worst rushing defense in the league in terms of fantasy points allowed, yardage allowed, things like that. It's a defense that's on the field a ton, with that team, usually trailing. So the fact that Nick Chubb struggled that much against the Houston Texans, that worries me. And if Cleveland's going to stay in this game, which again, I don't think they will, but if they're going to, they're going to need to throw the ball. They're going to need to go score for score with Cincinnati. And I think they're going to have to be forced to get a little uncomfortable and not pound Nick Chubb as much as they would like.
All right. Last guy we'll do here is the legend, Mike White at Buffalo, 270.5, John, more or less.
Going less. I think the dream ends here. I think we might see Zach Wilson out there next week. I think that, this is Mike White basically living on borrowed time. He's obviously had the 2 good games production-wise, but, he's not really getting the ball down the field. I think that the Bills are going to feast on him. I believe the last time that we saw Mike White before the Chicago game was against these Bills last year, and he threw 4 interceptions. So I'm thinking the meltdown spot is here for Mike White.
I like the way you put it. Orchard Park, New York, where dreams go to die. Very good. All right, moving on to that 425 window. We got the Bucs and the Niners going at it in San Francisco. The Niners favored by 3.5, even with Brock Purdy at quarterback. The over-under in this one, just 37 points. They're expecting a very low-scoring game. I don't think we have the lines up yet for this one, but we can kind of figure it out and go from here. Let's start with Tom Brady, Nick. He's averaging 277.5 passing yards a game this season, but this is a very good defense in San Francisco. What do we see out of TB12?
Yeah, it's been really hard to kind of separate Tom Brady, the fantasy player, from what else is going on in that Buccaneers offense. And I guess Tampa has to feel good about coming back and beating the Saints on Monday night. But anybody who watched that game, I mean, that was awful offense to watch for 95% of the night. And that's basically been the story every week for the Tampa Bay offense, is they can't run the ball. The only team they've been able to move the ball on the ground against is Seattle, and that was kind of a one-off in Germany. And you watch Tom Brady, he's not really throwing a ton of picks. He did have one, a pretty bad one by Brady standards last week, but he's taking care of the ball, he's getting the ball out quickly, but there's just no connection on deep passes. It just feels like it's a 2-yard out to Kate Otten or a 3-yard slant to Chris Godwin. And yet the yardage has been there because he's attempting so many passes. So even against this really good 49ers defense, I still think he might get there yardage wise, just solely based on volume, because we know for a fact that Tampa Bay is not going to be able to run the ball in this game.
Yeah. Can we put the milk carton out for Mike Evans? What has happened to Mike Evans? Where is he? I mean, I see him on the field, but he's just not producing at all.
Not great.
Oh, go ahead, John. Please take this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it ties into what Nick was saying. Like this offensive line, Brady doesn't trust it, and honestly, with good reason. They're down a lot of pieces from last year with Marpet's retirement, Ryan Jansen being out for the season before it even started, and so we just see a ton of quick game and not a whole lot of Brady being able to stand back there and wait for Evans to get way down the field. And when he's not doing that, it's not that Mike Evans can't do that, but maybe guys like Chris Godwin are just more adept at being the short, get open early in the route process than a guy like Evans. So I think that explains it. I just think that at this stage, Evans and Brady just aren't a good fit for each other.
Yeah, he's averaging just 4 catches over the last 4 games. He hasn't gotten into the end zone since October 2nd. So things are not looking good for Mike Evans right now. Let's go back to Brock Purdy, which we've pretty much spent this entire show on, I feel like. Nick, he had 210 yards last week against the Dolphins, 25 completions, 37 attempts. This Bucs defense, though, I think they're a little better than the Miami defense. What do we see out of Purdy?
Yeah, we'll see what B. Purd is bringing to the table. I mean, that Bucs defense, like you said, it's really good against the run. So I do think they might be able to force San Francisco into situations where Brock Purdy does have to, make plays for them. But I thought for the most part, I was fairly impressed with Brock Purdy, especially, this is not a game that he prepared all week to start. He was just kind of thrown in there cold after Garoppolo goes down. And I thought he did a good job kind of evading the pressure that was coming up the middle, making a few throws on the run. I mean, we're not talking Justin Herbert 40 yards downfield, but, he was accurate in the short to mid range. And I thought did a really good job, commanding that offense and moving the ball enough to hang on and get a convincing win against a really good team. So, we saw last week, Andy Dalton, I thought, played a pretty good game against this Buccaneers secondary. It's a secondary that looked really out of sorts, especially in the first half, a couple big broken coverages. You think about that touchdown to Taysom Hill. So we need to see what the injuries are first and foremost. If they have 3 starters out in the secondary, that'll be huge for Brock Purdy. But I'm actually inclined to believe that the drop off from Garoppolo to Purdy, it's there. It's enough for me to say that the 49ers are no longer a Super Bowl team, but I don't think it's a situation where all of a sudden, you have to go into this like crazy conservative type of game.
I'm wondering what the line's going to be here. I'm guessing it's probably be like around 190.
Yeah. If it's 190, I think he can get to 200 yards. I think he can, because again, I think San Francisco, relative to its normal week, is probably going to struggle on the ground.
All right, very good. John, how about Christian McCaffrey? Do we see a bigger workload for him this week now with Garoppolo out? His fantasy prop line, I think, has been holding pretty steady the past few weeks at like 18.5 fantasy points. What do you think we get out of CMC?
Right. And he's such a reliable pass catcher out of the backfield, of course, that it's hard to go against him. Like Nick was saying, that they have a very tough run defense, but, San Francisco is just kind of out of depth options in its backfield. So he kind of has to be the main guy. Jordan Mason can only do so much. So I think that we see McCaffrey like push for 60 yards rushing. I think about the same with his receiving. And then, so then the question becomes, does he score a touchdown? And I'm going to say yes. So I'm taking them all.
Let's move on to Sunday Night Football. After that just disgusting matchup last week with the Colts and Cowboys, we get a much more palatable one this week with the Dolphins in Los Angeles taking on the Chargers. Miami favored by 3 points on the road. The over-under this one is 51.5, so points are expected here. Let's talk about these two quarterbacks here. They will be forever linked, as the Dolphins famously took Tua over Herbert. But let's start off with Justin Herbert, Nick. 290.5 passing yards is his more or less. He's reached 291 in 5 of 12 games this season. Miami ranks 21st against the pass. And here's a little stat for you. Herbert has more than 90 attempts in the last 2 games combined.
Yeah, 47 each against Arizona and Vegas. I think it's going to be the same script. The Chargers are the worst run defense in the league, and they're one of the worst run offenses in the league. And they basically compensate for that by just throwing all these little makeshift screen passes to Austin Eckler. And that's kind of their running game. But that counts for yardage for Justin Herbert. So yeah, I think we see that again this week. I do not trust this Miami defense whatsoever. I mean, Mike Williams could be back in action for the Chargers. That would, of course, be huge for LA. So again, for a team that can't run the ball and is going to need to score points, and the over-under, of course, would imply that we will have plenty of points on the board this week. I think this is a good spot for Justin Herbert. I think he clears 300 yards.
All right, John, how about Tua? 280.5 is his more or less. He's reached 281 in 6 of 10 games this season, including 5 in a row here going into this one. The Chargers ranked 19th against the pass. He's been limited in practice this week, though. He aggravated that ankle injury last week, and he was missing both tackles. I think they're still on the injury report as we head into this one. And also, I will point this out, that he is the leader in Pro Bowl votes right now. The Tua and on, they are real, and expect us, John. What do we see out of Tua?
Yeah, the third eye of Tua and on, just that's a powerful group that you simply do not mess with. But yeah, when it comes to Tua this week, I am so worried about the protection. You get a pretty lively pass rush coming from the Chargers, and I think Tua, the lack of mobility that he might have with the ankle injury. I specifically remember Tua basically trying to play through an ankle injury in the SEC championship game, played so badly that they had to bring in Jalen Hurts, and then Jalen Hurts proceeded to rip my heart out. So they kind of flipped it from the year prior, but. No, I think that this is a bad spot for Tua. I think that the defensive metrics for the Chargers maybe aren't great, but even still, I think that this is a spot where Tua struggles. I'm taking less.
All right. Nick, Austin Eckler, 18.5 fantasy points is his more or less. He's coming off a quiet week heading into this one. Does he get things going again?
I think he does. I would almost rather kind of, invest in Eckler's fantasy point props than anything else with him, because I think then you at least account for the possibility that he gets it going on the ground. But, especially if you're talking PPR, I think this is a really friendly number against the Dolphins. And, as it feels like we say every week, they don't have many options. And who knows if Mike Williams and Keenan Allen make it through this game. This offense, if you watch the Chargers week to week, it's unbelievably reliant on Austin Eckler catching short passes and making things happen out of the backfield. So if you assume that he catches, somewhere between 7 and 9 balls in this game, and you're halfway there.
All right, John, Tyreek Hill, 109.5 receiving yards is his more or less. He's coming off his 6th game this season with more than 140. You don't like the more on Tua, but what about Tyreek?
Yeah, it's tricky. I don't think that Jalen Waddle disappears for a second week in a row. And again, I just don't think that the passing game is going to be there quite the same this time around for Miami. So it scares me to do it, because Tyreek can get 75 of these yards like on one play, as we saw last week, but I'm going less.
All right, Nick, last question on this one. Who has the better fantasy day, Jalen Waddle or Keenan Allen?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm going to lean Keenan Allen because I'm not 100% sure that Jalen Waddle is going to be healthy. They're listing him as questionable right now due to a fibula injury, and a fibula is a bone, as we know. So it's like, is it bruised? Like, it's kind of like that bone that's like in your shin, like that. If it's bruised, that seems like something that would, really be hindering you. Obviously we hope it's not fracture, but like you can't strain your fibula. It's not something that you just kind of like work throughout the week. So I'm wondering that, if the Dolphins are being maybe a little cagey with that injury. So to me, that's enough in what's kind of a 50-50 anyway, to push me toward Keenan Allen.
All right, very good. Before we go here, we do have to talk about Army Navy. The spread in this one, Navy's favored by 2.5, but that number that we always look forward to is the over-under in this one. It's at 32.5 right now. The under has hit in this game in 16 straight years, but it has never been this low. We are at a historic line in total for the over-under in this game at 32.5. And just Yahoo did a great write-up on this. I'm just going to quote a couple things here. If you bet $110 on the under in 2006 and you've rolled the winnings over every year since then, you'd be sitting up $3.4 million right now heading into this weekend. So since 2005, the under in matchups between the service academies, Army, Navy, Air Force, 43-9-1 going into this one. And also, so one last note here, 16 straight years of hitting the under, but if the total was 32.5 in all those games, the over would actually be 9-7. So John, how are you approaching this one? Is it, got to keep riding the streak here, or are you going to kind of be contrarian and say, no, they're due to finally hit the over?
So I think what we've seen over that sample that you're referencing is at least one of these teams has a pulse. That's not the case this year. These teams suck. Like Army and Navy are both pathetic this year. I'm a little bit surprised, frankly.
Move to Canada.
My bags are packed. My fancy new Rotowire Under Armour duffel bag is
the biggest duffel bag in the world.
You have a feature on Air Force or something?
Air Force stand up. But no, these are just bad teams. Like there's no continuity. It's ugly all around. Even like last year, you get the Army Wake Forest game that was points at Palooza. This time around, or like Navy, Keenan Reynolds years, like that stuff, like that was fun. There's just none of that this year. This is a slugfest. I'm thinking this one ends up being like, let's go 17-13 Army. So that puts us at the under as well. So I'm not expecting points on Saturday afternoon.
Nick, you riding the under as well?
I guess, yeah. At first I want to start by saying I have the utmost respect for our nation's service academies, unlike my compadre here, John McKechnie, who just apparently hates the Army, hates the Navy. A little suspicious, that's for sure. But yeah, I'll go under here. You laid out a pretty compelling case. That kind of look back at like how much money you would have if you just, if the total was set at X number. That reminds me of like the Broncos stat of like if they just got to 18 points, they would be the best team in the league. yeah, like John said, I'm not as locked in on Army and Navy as he is. So I will follow his advice here. And while I have the utmost respect for the academies themselves, it does sound like the football programs are struggling. So this is like the rare under where I feel like it's almost more fun to root for the under in a game like this, where both offenses are terrible.
Absolutely. Just keep punting. Just keep
Yes.
punting and running the triple option. Also, this is going to be the first time since 2016 that the Commander-in-Chief trophy will not be decided in this one, as both of these teams lost to Air Force earlier this. Yep. So Air Force wins the Commander-in-Chief trophy this season. All right, moving on. Oh, that's actually going to do it for us this week. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to hit subscribe on our YouTube page at Monkey Knife Fight, and good luck in all your contests this week.